Hello everyone! Today we'll talk about two big ideas for this video lecture. First is social epidemiology, basically how social conditions creates patterns of who gets sick, who stays well, and we'll also talk about social stress, how these particular pressures from our environments, from the upstream factors, become embodied, become part of our health and our functioning, and how they can result to illnesses or disease. And then we'll start with a quick historical arc of different health systems within and outside the Philippines. We've touched upon that in our previous lecture. And then we'll shift on how disease patterns change over time and end with how stress, as a sociological and fresh physiological processes interact with one another to connect distal factors to more proximal factors. So as I mentioned, we'll move in three different steps. First, we'll have a short history of health practices and the rise of modern medicine. Two, we'll talk about the perspective of social epidemiology and then the social-cultural determinants of health. And then three, we'll talk about social stress, how demands, sources, resources, and coping shape our health outcomes throughout the life course. So we'll talk about different people, like for example, Krieger, Link, and Phelan. We'll talk about Hans Selye, Walter Cannon, and of course, even our classical sociologists as we go along the way. So just like what we have established in our previous video lectures, this slide frames health as socially organized. So the move is to shift from the idea that health is caused by our biology and our physiology to health is produced through institutions, power, and unequal access to resources. To understand modern healthcare, we must analyze that social struggle for authority that built it is important. And so when we talk about the development of health through history, a sociological approach examines three pillars. First is knowledge construction. How do societies decide what is real? Like, when did we move or how did we move from diseases being caused by the spirits in our environment to, steam coming up from the land, and how did it move towards bacteria and microorganisms, and how it moved from being genetically modified or genetically predisposed, and then how did we move away from thinking from a scientific perspective to a more conspiracy perspective. So this is where we talk about ideas of Foucault, wherein knowledge is a form of power, right? Who consolidates what is true and what is normal in a society is the one that's powerful in society, who decides what is real or what is not real, what is acceptable, and how society could be organized or hierarchized. Next, the history of medicine can also be seen from how it organizes its practice through the years, or through the different eras. So the evolution from wandering shamans to now we have, healthcare being done in religious institutions, being done by faith healers, to moving towards, being a physician-centered care, moving healthcare to hospitals, and then now moving out into the community because of primary healthcare. So that's, again, another way of looking at history. And the third one is authority. Who gets to decide why you are healthy, that you are healthy or that you are sick, and what is going to be done to you when you're sick, what are your privileges, and what are your oppressions, when you are particularly sick, So those are sort of how we look at the different changes of medicine and healthcare throughout history. So let's begin during the ancient time, or the pre-modern health, or the era of spirits, the role of the shamans, and how we equate health to supernatural beliefs. So before modern biomedicine, many societies explain illness through spiritual or cosmological frameworks. Healing was communal and ritualized, involving specialists, often with moral authority, who address social conflict, spiritual imbalance, and body suffering together. Right? So ito yung mga shamans, mga folk healers, mga albularyo, no? So the concept here is that early humans viewed disease as a divine punishment, or nagkaroon ka ng sakit because mayroong pumasok na espiritong masama sa iyo, or it's because somebody wished ill upon you, or because somebody, became a victim of sorcery, or you became targeted with a sorcerer, no? Another discovered fact, about how they treated diseases back then were in the trephination, wherein they would use sharpened stones to drill holes in skulls, because they believed that it's the only way to release the evil spirits, in the body of the individual. Fossil evidence shows that the patients often survive after trephination. Of course, you can just imagine if that we will not be able to do that these days, because it's known to be very disability-inducing, if not death-inducing. And of course, we know that a common term across the world, where we call the folk healers during the pre-modern times, is the shaman. It's the first specialist. They served as intermediaries with the gods. So parang sila ang divine connector of the supernatural with the mortal beings, combining trial and error herbalism with psychotherapeutic rituals like dancing, chanting to inspire patient confidence. And of course, communal relationships have been considered as an important component of healing. Yan. And of course, in the Philippines, pre-colonial health was very pluralistic. It relied on herbal knowledge about massage and manual techniques, like for example, yung hilot, ritual, and of course, community care. And of course, we have the babaylan. The babaylan is considered a priestess, shaman, and healer, and these are usually women or gender expansive individuals, and their roles spanning healing, mediation, sila din ay tinitingala at tinitignan na sila ay pinaninirahan ng mga high spirits, and they also safeguard community well-being. And we talk about this because colonization didn't just change governance and how we approach our day-to-day social structures during the time, but it also reorganized what counted as legitimate knowledge and care. So, of course, we have the albularios, we have the hilot or herbalism, and then we use conflict mediation and dream interpretation, as a part of our healthcare, during our pre-colonial times. And then also during the pre-modern times, archaeologists, historians, anthropologists have also noted that in various parts of the world outside Western medicine, there have already been very complex ways of addressing health of people. Ancient systems had already mixed observation, ethics, and governance. For example, in Egypt, they already have professionalized medical roles. Of course, we know the mummification, and then that led us to learn a lot about anatomy. And then for China, it linked health with balance and harmony. In Mesopotamia, we have the Code of Hammurabi, which is the first formalized rules for the physicians during the time. And then we have the Ayurveda in India, which is, of course, a pre-modern basis for holistic theory in health. So the point here is that medicine has always been shaped by culture, institutions, and power even before the inventions of modern Western medicine and modern biomedical medicine. And then probably one of the more notable pre-modern thinkers related to health is Hippocrates. No? So Hippocrates introduced a paradigm shift which basically introduced that, the disease is not caused by supernatural beings, but it is a natural it is caused by natural factors. No, it is a natural process, and symptoms are body's reactions to external and internal environments. And also Hippocrates also introduced the idea of patient interaction, established that the patient and the physician has a two-way interaction, listening to patient history and observing progression to be able to heal the patient better. And of course, the legacy of Hippocrates, being the pre-modern father of medicine, is that sa kanya nagsimula yung Hippocratic Oath, which is being taken by physicians, the code that they utter, or they articulate before they receive their license. So it is actually, the Hippocratic medicine is often taught as an early naturalistic turn in health. Illness explained through bodily balance rather than pure spirits. And then we have the humoral theory. Ano yung humoral theory? That our bodies are made up of 4 humors. We have phlegm, blood, black bile, and yellow bile. And that there are 4 things that have to be balanced. Medyo very physics and natural physics yung kanilang dating. So it's either you do hot or cold therapy, dry, or wet therapy. So for example, if there is a problem with, let's say, phlegm, ikaw ay sinisipon, diyan nanggaling yun. So kailangan dahil siya ay basa at malamig, then you always have to keep yourself dry, and hot. So ganun siya, balance. But there's no more involvement of spirits here, and supernatural causes, yon. And then during the medieval period, medyo nag-stagnate yung medical progress, So it was uneven. Some traditions were constrained in many parts of Europe and also in colonial societies, while scholarship and hospitals advanced elsewhere. The broader takeaway here is that health knowledge changes with institutions like religious authority, kasi bumalik ulit tayo sa kaya ka nagkaroon ng sakit because you are being punished by God because of your immoral doings, But also during this time, in the medieval time, nagsisimula na rin yung pagiging enlightened ng mga tao, although not as as fully consolidated as it was in the Renaissance, but there were efforts in certain groups to really study about health in the natural causes of health. But because it was dominated by the church during this time, the religious thinking in terms of how health happens and how it is connected to your faith is still very much the dominant way of thinking. And as we know, especially in very religious countries like the Philippines or even the United States, faith healing is very still a central practice. Prayers is still being offered as an augmentative or a supplementary way of providing healing and care for people who are afflicted with illnesses. And then in the 19th century, we've seen the hospital revolution together with the Age of Enlightenment. The context here is that together with industrialization and urbanization, it created concentrated populations of the sick. It increased, of course, the distribution of labor. It increased professionalization and specialization. So the 19th century transformed medicine through hospitals, increasing scientific observations, clinical assessments, and new diagnostic tools. Laennec helped revolutionize the examination through the stethoscope. Ayan. So, you know the stethoscope, the one that you can find in the sa leeg ng mga doctors and nurses to listen for your heart, to listen for your breathing, and it helped us sort of look at what is happening inside the body. And of course, we know that we remember Virchow as someone who reminded us that medicine should also be looked at from a social perspective, but also looked into the idea that disease also begins at the cellular level. And of course, now we know that diseases also happen at the gene level, at the nuclei level, at the DNA level in our current. But, during that time, being able to identify the cell was very important. And so there's now that hinge to also organize healthcare, because nga people are being more concentrated in urban spaces, and this is where we find larger, more specialized hospital during this time. And of course, 19th century, if you remember, ito rin yung time na nag-aaral si Rizal in the Philippines history, dito nag-aaral si Rizal to become a doctor specializing in ophthalmology in Europe. So ito yon, kasabay nito yon. And then let's talk about the breakthrough, the germ theory and the power to cure. So germ theory is, during the time, has been very important because it helped us sort of talk about pathophysiology, pathogens, what causes diseases, right? And so when you are able to pinpoint what causes the disease, then you'll also be able to pinpoint the power to cure them. So this is a consolidation of biomedicine. Microorganisms were identified as causal agents, and we also identified antisepsis. When you say sepsis, it means presence of pathogens or presence of microorganisms in a substance. When we say antisepsis, it means the removal of harmful microorganisms in a given substance. When we say asepsis, right, this is the removal of all forms of microorganisms, both harmful and non-harmful, in a particular substance or in a particular thing. So for example, when we do surgery, or when we engage in surgery, we do what we call an aseptic technique, wherein we wash our hands very diligently so that we don't introduce any microorganisms. Make sure that all of the things that we touch are aseptic, all of the gloves are aseptic, all of the gowns that we wear are aseptic, because we don't want to introduce any microorganisms into the body of the patient. Antisepsis, an example, is putting alcohol. 99.9% of the germs, particularly the harmful ones, are removed, right? And then when we say sepsis, so for example, when you have septic shock, ibig sabihin, nagkaroon ka ng blood loss because of too much infectious agents inside your blood. So yun yung idea ng so because of germ theory, we were able to identify during this time that diseases were caused by germs. And so if you want to be able to cure people, you have to remove the germs, or if you want to prevent people from getting sick, you have to get rid of the germs, So nung time na yun, hindi pa super diversified yung idea ng germs. Basta we knew that there were little things inside the body and in the environment that help in the transmission and the causation of the disease, the germs, ika nga, And so that sort of revolutionized medicine during this time, And so this is where we learned Louis Pasteur, Pasteur, who introduced pasteurization, removing all of the harmful contaminants in the milk, Tapos ngayon babalik tayo to drink raw milk, very weird, And then also because of the work of Pasteur in terms of identifying bacteria, you move. This also started the works in developing vaccines. So vaccines, basically what they do is that you are introduced to a weakened form of the microorganism that causes the disease, so that it induces a natural immunity reaction in your body, but not just enough for you to create the antigens, but not give you the full-blown disease, so that when you get exposed, or when your body gets exposed to the quote-unquote germs that have caused that disease, you already have the mechanics inside your body to be able to resist them. And that's the issue that we have now for vaccines. That's why we are seeing measles again, we're seeing polio again, we're seeing tuberculosis again, because people are not getting vaccinated, and so we lose some form of herd immunity. And then of course we have Joseph Lister, and then we've talked about the importance of asepsis in many processes in medicine. As a nurse, the first skill that we're taught is actually hand washing. We have to make sure that our hands are clean. At least may antisepsis, some septic technique. We rub our hands 1 full minute of washing our hands before we go to our clients, so that, or we move from one client to the next, so that we don't transfer any pathogens from one client to the next, etc. And then we covered a little bit about this, in the last video, but just to review, the Philippines, the health systems foundations were heavily shaped by colonial governance. So we started to have our medicalized public health hospital system during American colonialism. If you want to be able to read that, read historical writings on that, I suggest you read on the work of Dr. Mercedes Planta of the History Department of UP Diliman. I quote her work a lot, and basically talked about how Americans during the time of colonialism, of American colonialism in the Philippines, they thought that the Filipinos were not very hygienic, and that was the cause of a lot of problems, diarrhea, and public health issues in the Philippines. And so they introduced sanitation, waste management, they introduced public health systems, the American systems, and of course, diba, pinadala nila yung Thomasites, and the Thomasites also, who were not only teachers, but they were also doing some health work, on the side. So the Ministry of Health was founded in 1898, and then quarantine and research institutions were built during this time as well. And during the independence, we had DOH, which maintained to be the natural steward. Health was highly centralized, but there was increased private sector growth. And then during the time of the Marcos presidency, we had the specialty hospitals, the National Kidney Center, the Philippine Heart Center, the Philippine Lung Center, were all built during this time. Again, during this time, very infrastructural yung idea ng progress, and then it was backgrounded with all of the issues that was part of martial law during the time. But yes, that was some of the development that were pointed out during the time of the Marcos era. And then we move post-revolution. To be fair, we had good medical training, and for allied health professions. The problem lang talaga is that there's a lot of brain drain, and this relationship of nurses migrating to the United States and other countries has been here with us for almost 100 years already. So we've been supplying nurses all over the world, and physicians and allied health professions like physical therapists and respiratory therapists, Ayan. And then of course we knew about the health reforms. We had the decentralization in the 1990s. We had the Universal Healthcare Act. We had the PhilHealth institutionalization, and of course we know about the problems from our last video based on that. So now let's move to social epidemiology, no? Unraveling the web of causation. So when we talk about health, morbidity, mortality, it is not only your biology that determines when and how you die, but it's also your social environment and your structural determinants. And so the core definition of social epidemiology is that it's the study of the causes and distribution of diseases and impairments moving beyond the identification of microorganisms to the analysis of social characteristics like class, race, gender, and the physical environment. Ano muna ba yung general epidemiology? So, epidemiology is the study of the distribution of the disease. So, this basically helps us predict when we'll have an outbreak, when we'll have an epidemic or a pandemic, no? This also tells us how diseases or certain symptoms sort of band together so that we'll be able to know that, this one is cancer, or this one is tuberculosis, this one is malaria. So epidemiology also helps us sort of identify those clinical symptoms, clinical epidemiology, right? And also in that case, it also helps us sort of identify where in that disease progression, from being exposed to the disease to developing the symptoms to losing the symptoms or being able to transmit, the disease, where could medical intervention happen, And so in epidemiology, we've been learning things like common questions about epidemiology is when is the fastest way for us to be able to diagnose dengue, for example, so that hindi too late na pag dinala sa ospital yung bata, naubusan na siya ng fluid sa katawan because of, hemorrhage and things like that. So those are the things that are being asked in epidemiology, among other things. It's a very mathematical subject as well, no? Usually biostatistics and epidemiology are magpinsan, no? They are working with maths, but they're different arts, I would say, no? So we'll not get into those, no? But of course, our friends who are physicians and public health practitioners know about biostatistics and epidemiology. And so social epidemiology specifically also talks about disease progress, disease distribution, even health condition distribution, but focuses on social factors rather than clinical factors or disease progression within physiological terms, right? So the key concept shifts from early epidemiology, hunting, infectious agents, to modern social epidemiology, which explains chronic degenerative patterns via a web of causations approach. And this was noted by Krieger in 1994. Like, for example, why do you have cancer? Maybe it is a mix of the lifestyle that you are doing, sedentary lifestyle, eating a lot of red meat, drinking a lot of alcohol, smoking a lot of cigarettes. You may also be predisposed because of your genetics and biology. So that's more biological, no? Baka you are you have somewhere in your family tree who has also a cancer, no? And then it can also be with social systems and environment, no? Walang mammography, so you weren't able to see immediately after 40 or 50 if you've had breast cancer. So walang libreng mammography, it's not part of your annual physical exam. So you were able to, and you weren't taught, or hindi part ng health education ng workplace mo yung breast self-exam. So as a woman, hindi mo alam na yung nodes, that are found in your breast are actually cancerous, You didn't have it checked until meron ka ng mataas na stages for cancer, and it's harder to treat, or the prognosis is worse. Then of course we have social systems and the environment. You can be exposed to a lot of teratogens. I think I've I have explained teratogens with you. Teratogens is teratogens are anything that you expose to a mother when she is childbearing that can cause poor health outcomes to the baby, either intellectual disability or physical disability to the baby. That's teratogens. The one that causes cancer are carcinogens. Ayan. So para tama tayo. So carcinogens. Right? So those that cause. So what are example of carcinogens? Smoking, eating a lot of burnt food, no, pollution, no. So those are examples of carcinogens. Yon. Now, in history, there's what we call an epidemiological transition, right? So we began no with the age of pestilence and famine, wherein during this period no we had high mortality, low life expectancy, and this is found a lot in dominant in global south history, where there's a lot of malnutrition and poor sanitation. So prior to industrialization, this is what we saw. So we have the Black Plague, we have the different forms of diseases, no? So prior to industrialization, ito yung meron. And then we had the age of receding pandemics. With the industrialization, as we mentioned earlier, no, in the history of health, age of enlightenment, scientific medicine, being able to identify what causes the disease, so we're able to prevent it. And so what happened was that nag-recede yung mga pandemics that we used to have, no? And so the life expectancy no went from 20 to 40 years old to 50 years, no? So infectious disease declined, sanitation improved, so nag-decrease ngayon yung gastrointestinal infections, no? But there is an increase in degenerative death or degenerative diseases, no? So for developed countries and many of the developed countries, no, we have now the age of degenerative and human-made diseases. So this started in the mid-1900s, wherein mortality stabilizes and now happens at low levels, no? And the life expectancy generally globally is around 70 years old. We see this a lot also in developed countries, no? Pero because you are living longer, because you're not dying prematurely because of infectious illnesses, diba? What happens is that you get degenerative diseases, sedentary lifestyle diseases, diseases due to carcinogens, diseases to wear and tear of the body. So you have cancer, you have heart disease becoming primary painkillers, no? So basically, the source notes that nandito tayo, especially if you're from a developed country. But eventually, no, we would be able to see later on in a few years, no, an age of delayed degenerative diseases, wherein the risk for dying from chronic disease pushed to older ages due to medical tech and behavioral changes. So ibig sabihin, we see a lot of 60, 70, 80 years old being able to still be physically fit and able productive just as they usually are. No, we see in Singapore, for example, they're moving the retirement no beyond around 70 years old. I think the same thing is being talked about in Japan, no, because while they're old and while there's of course early wear and tear in their bodies, even if they're already in their middle old adulthood, they are still able to, they're still healthy. No, so we see a lot of longevity, no, healthy aging, no? But there is an argument that what would happen, no? So by the way, no, itong epidemiological transition is by Abdel Omran, no? So this is Omran's work. And then Gaziano argued, no, that there would be, no, this future transition of the age of obesity and inactivity, wherein obesity epidemic threatens the progress of what you already have. And so as we know, no, obesity is a risk factor of many diseases, to the fact that obesity or morbid obesity is already considered a disease itself. And so yung mga gains natin, no, from all of the epidemiologic transitions we've had, no, bumabalik sila ulit, no, because of the obesity and activity. Now, in the Philippines, do we see the same? Yes, we do see the same, but all around the Philippines, you would see that there are areas where infectious diseases are still endemic. No, like for example, in certain parts of Palawan, you have infectious diseases that are still, no, very endemic during high rates of malaria. In the morbidity and mortality list in the Philippines, as we mentioned, no, there is the triple burden of disease, diba? We have infectious diseases, still have high rates of tuberculosis, high rates of dengue fever. And then you also have, degenerative and human-made diseases. So we still have cancer as one of our top killers. We still have heart failures as a part of our killers. Diabetic-induced deaths, And then of course we have disaster-related, urbanization-related diseases like disaster-related deaths, injury, disability, as the third link, And at the same time, we're also experiencing a lot of increase in obesity, Particularly those among the very, of course, this is seen, in many classes, for the poor because they lack choices for the type of meals that they can have, for the richer ones because they have an abundance of food, So that is basically the epidemiological transition, and you can imagine why this is sociologically important because again, health is again very much dependent on where we are historically situated. And then another issue that we are experiencing from a global perspective, and even among developed countries like the United States, is the triple threat, that we are experiencing in the world at the moment. So we have new pathogens, we have COVID-19, we have Zika, we have MERS virus, we have Mpox. As I'm speaking now, there is currently a virus being studied in India causing outbreaks and napaka non-specific nung kanilang mga illness. So hopefully it doesn't become a full-blown pandemic because I don't want to go through that again. I'm sure you don't want to go through. But yeah, that's a threat. Because of the problem with if you get a new type of microorganism or new pathogen or new quote-unquote germs, that you have to study it. And it takes some time before you are able to study it, what its DNA sequence, ano yung genetical makeup niya, how it's going to be distributed, what would be the best way to treat it, And we've seen how, yung experience natin sa COVID in particular, being able to come up with the vaccine in 6 months is already unprecedented, It's the fastest that we're able to create a vaccine for a disease, But, yun yung pinakamabilis, and it still took you 6 months. It still took us in the Philippines in particular almost years of quarantine before we are able to go back to our normal lives that we are having right now, And then we have the reemergence of those diseases that have been eradicated before, like for example, the reemergence of measles in the United States, in the Philippines, reemergence of polio in the Philippines. So we have those now. And then we have drug resistance. Oh my God, this is very, very scary because what happens is that when a certain microorganism becomes resistant to a particular drug, then you cannot treat that disease with that drug anymore. And what happens is that if you're not able to contain that microorganism and it gets passed on to another person, and then it gets passed on, to a whole bunch of people within their networks, then you have a lot of people with drug-resistant, TB or whatever, So what happens is that their first line of defense for drugs, becomes now less effective. And so what happens is that people will need to buy a different type of drug that is not resistant, wherein the microorganism or the pathogen is not resistant to, which is usually more expensive, right? And so yeah, I remember being in Quirino Institute when it was still open. Quirino Institute is Quezon Institute, I'm sorry. It used to be a place where many tuberculosis patients were brought. It was a very, very old hospital, and you can just imagine it like a horror movie type of hospital, right? So it's an old hospital, and then we were being toured around the different interiors of the hospital, and then they pointed us to a very secluded, isolated ward, and they say that's the multi-drug resistant. That is where you find the multi-drug resistant TB, and actually some of the TBs there are resistant already to the first line, to the second line, drugs. And so the scary thing is, if you are the nurse in that particular area and you get that disease, you have that multi-drug resistant tuberculosis as well. So you can just imagine the nurses wearing full protective equipment, getting there. Of course, we weren't exposed there because we were students, but we were just setting that, we have that level of multi-drug resistant. And where did that come from? By there was a time where in antibiotics, you can buy antibiotics at sari-sari stores. So people would take in a lot of antibiotics. And one of the issues there is that when you take antibiotics and you stop taking them when you're already well, usually kasi a course of antibiotics is 7 days. If you're not able to, for example, on the 4th day, wala ka ng symptoms and you stop taking it, the tendency is the microorganism is still alive and it's now resistant to the medicine that you are taking. It can be, no? There's a probability. And so ito na yung umiikot ngayon. So what are the drivers for this triple threat? So we have, of course, population growth, saturation and overpopulation within urban communities. Of course, travel, syempre, no? At yun yung issue nun sa pandemic, no? That's why we were closing borders, no? And then climate change, because climate change increases the vectors, or it creates more breeding ground for vectors, no? Deforestation, because habitat loss brings humans closer to the vectors that brings the diseases to them, no? If it's zoonotic, pag sinabi nating zoonotic disease, ibig sabihin these are diseases that are coming from animals, no? And then wildlife trade, no? 2/3 of emerging pathogens come from animals, and so when they are illegally traded without proper materials or proper mechanisms, then it can transfer diseases, no? Now, from a sociological and economic perspective, one way for us to further appreciate the sociological significance of illnesses is to measure the burden of life and death. So when you say burden, how, pag sabi nating burden, paano na ito naka-apekto sa buhay ng mga tao, no? So this is something that you can actually quantify. Now, so how do you quantify burdens of life and death? So of course, one way to measure that is life expectancy, the average years expected for a person to live in a given society. We have mortality, the number of deaths, no, because of that disease. We have infant mortality rate, which is basically, the number of deaths for 1 year per 1,000 births, no. And then of course we have the maternal mortality rate, which is the death until the postnatal period for every 1,000 live births. And then we have morbidity, the number of actual diseases. And then we have we have incidence. Pag sinabi natin incidence rate, ito yung mga new cases. Pag sinabi natin prevalence, ito yung total cases with the old and the new. So pag sinabi natin tumaas ang incidence rate ng HIV, for example, so ibig sabihin we're just talking about the recent cases. So for example, ang incidence rate ng HIV is 60, so we can expect that this 60 came up within 3 months or 6 months, before the time we were talking. Pag sinabi natin na ang prevalence ng HIV is 120,000, for example, then it means that since the very beginning, ito yung number ng cases that we've had among living persons here, in a particular society, no? And then how do we also account for disability? So we have the medical model of disability, which is the individual deficit. Ibig sabihin, you're not able to move from point A to point B, or not able to do activities of daily living on your own, no? Pero ang argument ng social model of disability it is the environment that actually disables you. But for example, if you can't walk and there's a lot of ramps in your environment, then you aren't experiencing that disability. So the argument of the social model of disability is that your disability, or the extent of your disability, is a function of how disability friendly your environment is, etc. So in short, the argument is for the social model of disability is that it's not a body problem, it's a gap between the person's capabilities and the environment's design. And of course, we're going back to the Link and Phelan's theory, of fundamental causes and proximate causes. So fundamental causes are the upstream resources and power that causes disease, like money, power, knowledge, prestige, social connections. Link and Phelan argue that when new risks emerge, people with resources protect themselves first, so inequalities persists even diseases change. No? So, yan, inequality, racism, ito yung fundamental causes. And the proximate risk factors are the immediate mechanisms of why you get illness. So, by behaviors, pathogens, your physiology, no, like diet, exercise, smoking, stress management, yan yung proximate factors. So, for example, in the Philippines, no, ano ang proximate causes of malnutrition and stunting among children? No? So, for example, syempre, poor nutrition, no? But also, for mothers, it could be the diet, no, infectious agents during pregnancy, smoking during pregnancy, stress during pregnancy, and then also lead toxin exposure. But, if there is a problem in terms of stunting or any birth defects of the baby, it is also exposed, you're also exposed to fundamental causes, no, like poverty, inequality, colonial legacy, commercial determinants of health, no, how market forces, no, influences your life choices. We'll talk about that in the next video lecture. So what are other fundamental causes? Informal settlements, air pollution, occupational risks, like if you are exposed to informal labor, you are less likely to have health insurance, right? So the consequences of that would be high off-pocket spending risk. Of course, you also have fiscal inequalities, and of course, another fundamental causes would be conflict areas, etc. No? And then another fundamental cause, no, is gender and sexuality, no. Sabi nga nila, women live longer but more morbidity, while men die faster, no. So gender patterns, exposure and protection. Women often live longer but carry higher morbidity because of caregiver burdens, labor segmentations, violence risk, and barriers to care. So ano yung mga exposures ng mga kababaihan? So they have higher burdens, they have reproductive and mental health risks, no? And then of course andun pa rin yung mga fundamental causes natin, ano? And then at the same time, why are males more likely to experience, no, or to have shorter life expectancies, no? Because they usually die of quick causes like heart attacks, or in a precipitate na because they keep their stress, and then also they delay healthcare, particularly because of, you know, as Connell writes it, no, hegemonic masculinity, no? Bakit, no? Hindi kasi nakakalalaki if you are not able to, you know, endure your illness or your pain, no? It's a manly thing to do if you are enduring your pain, no? Things like that, no? And then of course sexuality as well, no? So GSC discrimination, so GSC sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, no? Any form of discrimination exposes them to what we call minority stress, no? Nakaka-stress maging minority, particularly because you are hypervigilant for microaggressions. You are always scared of being harassed. You're always scared, no, of being discriminated, no, in many spaces in society, no. And so we have health barriers. Also, they tend to delay care. They have mental health issues. For transgender individuals, they may not have access to transgender affirmative care, no, particularly in the Philippines. Problema natin yan. And of course, we also see that elsewhere in the world. And then of course, in the Philippines, there's still high risk of HIV passed among men who have sex with other men, and trans women having sex with men, and sex workers, no? And this is not because of their sexual identity, it's really more of sexual behavior, no? Ayan. So the higher risk populations, we have your men who have sex with men, transgender women, and health workers, no? Female sex workers. Ayan. So, and then this is increased due to limited access to stigma-free services, no? Particularly when you go to the peripheries of the country, in the rural areas. So, this is how also gender and sexuality, and you can think of other reasons why gender and femininity, being a woman, being gender non-conforming, having a sexual identity other than heterosexuality, being trans, gender expansive, increases your risk for illnesses. Aside from, of course, there's always that stress that is always that you're always exposed to, but also at the same time, many spaces are discriminative of you. Health spaces are discriminative of you. Medical training doesn't necessarily normally include gender sensitivity trainings. So yon. And then we see how this particular inequalities played out, no, during the time of COVID-19. So in the book, of course, it talked about what happened in the States, but in the Philippines, we don't really have to look that far. There's so many outcomes that are inequitable, no, during the time of COVID-19, and we see how it's indirectly related to the class of a person, no. Richer persons have the privilege of having private beds already available to them whenever they ask it, as opposed to poorer people crawling in lines just to be accommodated in tents outside poorly resourced district hospitals. I personally experienced that for my father when he had COVID. He's okay now, but yeah, that's one of the experiences that we had, right? And then of course for gender, no, we look at females are more likely to take on the burden, no, within the house, especially when everybody was in lockdown, no. So yon. And then for treatment, sino yung mga nauuna to have access to the vaccines? The politicians, the elite, no, they had earlier access to the vaccines. And then of course in other countries, we see a lot of racial gradients to that, no. So people, racialized individuals like blacks, Hispanics, no, they had higher morbidity and mortality rates of COVID compared to their white, richer counterparts. So it is untrue to say that we are all on the same boat. That is so not true, no. Some boats are better made for people based on their social status. Now, let's move from social epidemiology that talks about structures, no? Gender, sexuality, class, race, ethnicity, religion. And let's talk about a little bit more in the proximate causes, no? So we talked about the fundamental causes, which are the structures, the structural violences. Now let's talk about how structural violences, no, gets transmitted to your personal woes, no? So let's talk about the sociology of stress. So according to Stoklos, stress is a state of imbalance within the person elicited by an actual or perceived disparity between environmental demands and the person's ability to cope. Stress isn't only an event, it's a relationship between demands and resources. Sociologically, we ask, who is exposed to acute and chronic stressors like job insecurity, discrimination, and unsafe households or neighborhoods? Then we track how stress accumulates inside your body, no, and becomes embodied via coping constraints, biological wear and tear, and unequal recovery opportunities. Okay, so let's talk first about stress, of its basic meaning, no? So, stress is a mismatch, no? When environment demands exceed coping resources, acute stress response can be adaptive, but chronic activation harms the body. So, for example, what happens, no? So, stress is actually an evolutionary tactic that our body had developed, especially particularly during the time na hunter-gatherer pa yung mga societies natin, di ba? So, ano ba kasi yung mga threats noon? So, yung mga threats noon were hinahabol ka ng leon or hinahabol ka ng malaking predator, no? So, what happens is that mag-activate yung fight or flight mo. So, the hypothalamus would signal, will increase the physiologic reactions, ano yung mangyayari? So, tataas yung blood sugar because ina-anticipate ng katawan mo that you will need more energy. Your heart will accelerate because you need to have your body pumped with a lot of oxygen. Digestion slows because that is not where you want your blood to be. You want it to be where your muscles are because you have to run, you have to fight, no? A particular predator, no, or and then your muscles tense because you have to contract your muscles so that you can run faster, punch harder, draw your axe, swing your axe to whatever predator or to whatever kalaban you have, right? And so that is where your sympathetic nervous system becomes active, and your adrenal and thyroid glands release a lot of adrenaline, release a lot of cortisol, and this cortisol is being used again, no, for us to be able to have lot of energy, etc. And then, after that, after mo mapatay yung predator, nung panahon ng hunter and gatherer tayo, no, tutulog ka na. And then sometimes, no, your body will have a chance to heal, you will celebrate, no, magre-relax na yung mga nakipag-away until the next predator comes after a few days or a few months. But there's a time for you. Now, what happens is that our body or our minds, no, when there is stress, no, does not distinguish between, a large predator that you need to run from stresses that might not need, physical vitality like what our ancestors needed. For example, na-stress ka dahil sa exam, long exam, so you had to be stressed. Or na-stress ka because malilate ka na. And so what happens is that the same stress response that your body created, that our ancestors created to run from predators, is the same stress response that we are having because of an exam. The difference is that we don't need to run, or we don't need physical activity for us to be able to sort of have that exam, right? So what happens is that all the cortisol, all of the muscle tensing, all of the digestive distress, all of the increased sugar, all of the cortisol gets stuck and unused because you didn't really use the vitality that your body expects you to use because of stress. Akala ng katawan mo, akala ng utak mo, merong humahabol sa yung leon, pero it's really just a scary exam. And another thing is that in our current place in time, dati kasi stress, you get exposed to a predator, to a stressful event, to a disaster, no, seasonally, right? Like it takes some time from one stressful event to another stressful. So there's a time for your body to kind of calm down. Now, you get stressed multiple times a day. So your sympathetic nervous system, deadlines, exams, no, they all, before you even get to rest, no, before your flight or flight response, sort of calms down, there's a new stress again. And so what happens, it gets piled up, and so it affects your cardiometabolic, it causes biological wear and tear. It increases your risk for a lot of things, no? So yun yung mismatch na tinatawag natin na Pinoy ni Cannon. By the way, no, the general adaptation syndrome or the, is coined by Hans Selye, and this is Walter Cannon on the mismatch. So according to Perlin, stress is a process. It's not an event. It's something that we go through. So it begins with us being exposed to a stressor, whether that is a recent life event, an acute life event, or a chronic strain. And then it is based on how we interpret the stressor that the appraisal of that stressor will indicate the extent to which we are stressed. Kaya nga sometimes in therapy, we are taught to sort of appraise our stress sort of more objectively so that we don't get overwhelmed, so that our stress response isn't as high as it used to be. And then there would be mediators that can sort of help alleviate the stress, like social resources, or you have coping techniques such as, for example, whatever you've learned as a problem solving or other types of coping, and then that will lead to either positive or negative outcomes like morbidity, physical morbidity, psychological morbidity, or mental health issues, or death. And so this is a way for us to be able to practice our social imagination. How is our stress response, our physical stress response, when our stress converts to physical symptoms, how is that related to wider social stress? So for example, I can just imagine during the last national elections about like the wave of depression and anger that had waved through the country, particularly for those who voted for the losing candidate. And this is how stressors, exposure, particularly even thinking about your future, can be a stressor. By the way, what's the difference between stress and anxiety? So, ang outcome ng stress and anxiety is fight or flight, right? You have stress outcomes. Pero stress is based on a real perceived stressor. Anxiety does not have an identified stressor. So anxiety is feeling stressed for things that you're not sure of what it is. So yun siya. And so we have the acute stressor and the chronic stressor. So we have the bad day versus the hard life. Sometimes we would just have a discrete interruptive life event that will cause a significant amount of strain, like a divorce, a job loss, the death of a spouse, right? And this is usually dissipating within 3 months. But of course, we also have chronic strains like we endure daily, like poverty, role overload, conflict, sexual discrimination, gender discrimination, right? Racial discrimination, microaggressions, and things like that, Having to survive every day, the fear of losing your land from dispossession, So, and what happens is that life and chronic strains overlap. So, a job loss creates marital conflict, for example, which causes chronic strain. So, yun siya. So, they can add up. So, again, your social stress, and your outcomes, the physiological outcomes of those stress, whether that's hypertension, high blood, heart attack, diabetes, getting into ill behaviors, these are all connected to social realities that you live every day. And which is also very much connected with upstream factors, which I've discussed earlier in social epidemiology. Now, again, what is another way for us to be able to understand this from a sociological perspective? So, saan pumapasok yung mga stressors na to, particularly the chronic one? So, it can be role overload, right? So, again, role is a sociological construct, diba? This is what society expects you to do, So, when demands exceed your ability. So, for example, you're a mother and you are exposed to what we call the second shift or the clopening, You're both, as a mother, you have to do expressive functions of parenting, but also instrumental functions of earning a living, especially when you're a single mother. So that's role overload. no? And we also have interpersonal conflicts, no? So again, this is sociological as well, no? If there are disagreements between people that you interact with in a regular basis, that can cause stress. We have interrole conflict, no? Like incompatible demands, like clopening, shifts making family care impossible. Like for example, you want to be a good worker, but you are nakalagay sa graveyard shift, no? And so you cannot tuck your children to bed. So that's an example of an inter-role conflict. And then we also have role captivity, wherein you are trapped in an unwanted obligation, no? Like for example, you are in a sandwich generation. You have to take care of your parents. You also have to take care of your children. And you have role restructuring, like forced change patterns, like for example, an adult child parenting a parent at hindi siya prepared para doon. No. So these are examples of how sociological factors sort of contribute to social stress, contribute to physical and mental health outcomes. So like we said, no, according to Thomas, no, if situations are defined as real, they are real in their consequences. So kahit, for example, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na wag mo kasing isipin ganyan para hindi masyadong kung ako nga nung panahon ko hindi naman ganyan. That's why that's not acceptable, because if the person believes that that is a stressor for them, even if it's not a stressor for you, for them it will cause them the stress response, right? And so it is important, no, to also look into how people appraise or perceive the stressor event, right, or job loss. So for example, you say there are two persons, no, experiencing the same events like job loss. For one person, this is the only source of income. So for them, it's a tragedy. So it can cause high stress. But for another person, it is an opportunity because they've always wanted to go into a new business. So for them, it's a challenge, no? So not because we are exposed to the same stressor, we are of the same. So again, maybe this is one of the reasons why for example, no, if you would remember the very first reading my paper, no, looking at how national resilience, political climate is positively improving mental well-being. So it also means that it is also negatively impacting mental well-being. And this is because for them, while there's a lot of objectively faulty things that are happening in our political structures, in our governance systems, but people perceive it to be okay. So for them, it's not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. It's something that they like to happen. So yeah. So papasok sociologically, yung microsociology, symbolic interaction eating. Reality is socially constructed, therefore, right? We respond to the perceived world, not the objective one. Now, the way we appraise it and the way we cope is, psychological na tayo, no? Is based on our individual coping mechanisms. So there's a large list of coping mechanisms, no? When I was doing psychiatric nursing, we had to memorize all of those different coping mechanisms. So we'll just, pick the common one. So, for example, you may cope using psychological resources, no? In the context of Zimmerman, we call this resilience factors. No? So resilience actually has a broader meaning, not just the resilience that is being... so resilience can be an internal thing, it can also be an external thing. So ano yung mga psychological resilience? So self-esteem. So do you think you can handle the stress? So the higher behavioral control you have, the higher self-efficacy you have, the better you'll be able to handle the challenge. Next is internal control, believing you are the master of your own fate. So this is called mastery. Diba? Do I have more control over my futures in life? No? And hardiness, commitment to challenge. Commitment, challenge, and control. The extent to which you are able to bounce back as easy as possible. No? And even if, pasadahan ka ng maraming stressor sa buhay, nakatayo ka pa rin, that's hardiness. So that is psychological resource. We have also cognitive techniques like kung ang issue ay perception, 'di ba? Then let's perceive it differently. Control the meaning. And then neutralization. It could be worse, no? Or spiritual beliefs, which is still very helpful, no? Not the panacea, but for certain people, it's helpful for them to do spiritual and mindful exercises, no? For them to be able to have a better appraisal. Manifesting for them is important. They go for it, no? Next, we have behavioral techniques like doing action plans. So this is your cognitive behavioral therapy, doing actual problem solving. What do you do when this happens so that you'll be more prepared, you have a better appraisal of it, biofeedback or exercise, so if ang problema ay your body is consumed with a lot of the stressful energies and masyadong mataas, napapalpitate ka na, mataas ang heart rate, edi go like our ancestor did. Do some physical activity, to just, calm you down. And distraction also. Music, shopping, retail therapy. Ayan. So, the key insight here is that problem-focused strategies dealing directly with the stressor generally lead to better outcomes than avoidance strategies. Ayan. But you also have to look at this from, again, a structural perspective. Like, for example, internal control. For example, I would argue that richer people are more likely to have better hardiness than poorer people because they have more control over their lives and their destinies as opposed to poor people because, again, money can buy a lot of opportunities and ways out. Can buy you therapy, etc. Now, another sociological significance of this is that, social support is important in alleviating stress. So, we can say that how does having social capital or social networks, one, it can help promote well-being even if you're not stressed. The fact that you are surrounded by people decreases, your appreciation or your identification of the stressor. And also, social support can buffer. So, for example, if there's an actual stress, your social support, your family, your friends, your peers, your community, your classmates, your teachers, your volunteer group can help lighten the affective and the cognitive load for you. So, for example, nagbabantay ka ng iyong parent na nagkasakit, sino ang gagawa ng errands? If you have social support, they can buffer these activities for you. So that's why sometimes, for example, may pagkakaiba, like there are certain racialized minorities in the States who are less likely, who are exposed to the same stressors, but one group is less likely to have illness. So, for example, Hispanic Americans are less likely to have illness as opposed to their African American counterparts. The argument here is that you have your for Hispanics, the social support is very high. The same thing with Filipino Americans, So the key insight here is that social support is not panacea, but its absence is a major risk factor. So you can just imagine how social support is so important for HIV care. So kaya counseling is very important. Group dynamics is very important during HIV, particularly if their established social groups may not be as supportive or they're afraid to come out as HIV positive to their established groups, So again, anong nangyayari sa iyo pag na-stress ka? What are the physical outcomes? So you can have emotional outcomes, anxiety, depression, phobias, and insomnia, hindi makatulog. Sleep disturbance can also cause organic wear and tear. So you can have epilepsy or chronic bouts of seizures. You can have arthritis, which I have. You can also have psychosomatic issues like hypertension, high blood, coronary heart disease, like the vessels in your heart. They can have. They can be inflamed. You have ulcers. You have colitis, is the inflammation of your colon. Behavioral. You have aggression. You have withdrawal, substance abuse, and compulsive behaviors, which of course contribute to poorer health outcomes as well. Now, where the social part comes in, no? It comes in through vectors of disadvantage. So for example, when we talk about socioeconomic status, no, those we talk about it based on exposure and vulnerability. So for exposure hypothesis, the disadvantage happens when there are more bad things that they're exposed to or more bad things happen. And vulnerability is that they have fewer sources to deal with the bad thing. So for example, for those who are in high socioeconomic status, they have higher exposure, no? They have higher exposure, no, to advantage. So they have lower exposure to stressors, like they have safe house, they have stable housing, but the exposure, no, for low socioeconomic status is high, no? There's a lot of, so they live in a high crime neighborhood, high noise pollution, dangerous jobs, instability, yung mga they are exposed or they're living in high disaster risk areas, etc. No? But low SES also have low vulnerability, no? High SES, have low vulnerability. So they have high financial buffer. So pag nagkasakit sila, may pambayad sila. No? They also have high social capital. Meron silang kakilalang doktor na pwedeng tumulong sa kanila. May kakilalang nurse na pwedeng tumulong sa kanila, etc. They're also highly educated. So they know health literacy. No? They know what doctor to see. No? But for low SES, you have high vulnerability. You have few resources to cope and lack of buffer. So, less money to pay for the doctor, etc. And then, of course, we have the neighborhood effect. Living in disordered neighborhoods produces subjective alienation, mistrust. So, syempre, tataas yung anxiety mo at depression, and so you have higher risk for cognitive health declines later in life. Education, as I mentioned earlier, can be a protective factor against stress because you have higher work autonomy. Ibig sabihin, pag nawalan ka ng trabaho, it's easier for you to go to the next job because you have education. More fulfilling and complex yung work. Feeling mo mas may impact yung ginagawa mo, so you have higher psychological resources. You have better economic resources, no? So you have lesser vulnerability when you get sick. Now, racism and also, I would say, sexism and also heterosexism, it causes, getting exposed to microaggressions every day in your life can cause a lot of cortisol release and oxidative stress that can cause a lot of cognitive decline, no, as compared to those who are not experiencing racism. But there's what we call a black-white paradox kasi in the States daw, black populations have lower mental health disorders but have worse physical health conditions. So, ang argument dito or a theory here is environmental affordances wherein coping for, psychological stressors because of racism leads them to have unhealthy behaviors like smoking, comfort food, and saves the mind from distress but proactively hurts the body. And then, another, sociological interesting thing is the gender and authority paradox. For men, being in positions of authority is less stressful for them. It's more fulfilling for them. But for women, mas mataas daw ang kanilang distress because of authority. Aside from the gender dynamics in the work, ang isa pa nilang issue is that, meron ka nang authority at work pero pag uwi mo, you're still the mother and you still have to do the second shift or the parenting or the overload. No? Men with job authority has less depression. Women with job authority have more depression. Okay? Because why? Authority violates feminine norms, leading to workplace resistance. And then, of course, we have the minority stress theory. No? And this is a theory that is usually used to be able to understand why sexual minorities, trans individuals are more likely to have mental illnesses as opposed to their cis-heterosexual counterparts. No? And we see that there is a 12-year gap of life expectancy among people, no, within high prejudice communities than low prejudice communities. So, to consolidate everything we talked about, this is the WHO's socio-cultural determinants of health framework, no? Ang wala lang dito is yung digital, no? Dapat wala pa kasi yung digital, but I argue that there is also a digital determinant that is also within the structural determinant. So itong intermediary determinants, ito yung proximal causes na tinatawag natin kanina, and dito ngayon yung structural determinants, ito yung fundamental cause, no, in the parlance of medical sociology. Okay, so if there is to consolidate everything, we can discuss it using this context. So for example, we have the socio-economic political context that causes equity and health and well-being outcomes, right? So, syempre, yung type of governance that we have, the macroeconomic policies that we have, how much funding do we provide for health? What are the laws that we have for health funding and health financing? Social policies like labor market, housing, land, disaster protection, insurances, public policies like for education, health, special protection. And of course, generally, we also talk about the informal norms like societal culture and societal values and culture. And then, another would be the individual socioeconomic position, which are also very much correlated with your socioeconomic context. So, you have your social class, your gender, your ethnicity, or your race, no? And this affects your education, occupation, and your income. And then, at an individual level, no, at the household level, ano naman yung mga nag-i-impact sa health outcomes mo? It's your material circumstances, your living conditions, food availability, food security, healthcare access, no? And then of course, ito mas individual, but like we mentioned earlier, it's also connected to other things, no? Biological and behavioral factors and psychosocial factors, no? Your coping, etc. And as we mentioned, social cohesion, social capital is considered a mediator so that the social stressors that come from the structural determinants, can be buffered so that they would not affect your health. And so, this is your structural determinants of health. Ito yung pinigay ko sa ating mga kaibigan sa computer sciences. This is what they're going to be working on, and this is also going to be one of the major things that we're going to look at when we study. So you can think of a particular disease condition. You can actually map it, map its prevalence based on the socio-cultural determinants of health. So, i-add lang natin dito ang digital, infrastructure, access to computers, access to technologies. Yan. I argue that's also a socio-cultural determinant of health. Very, very quickly, just sharing with you some empirical demonstration of the socio-cultural determinants of health, social epidemiology and social stress. For example, in a paper that I wrote, I saw that people live, or emerging adults who live, in urban areas have lesser odds for depression than rural areas. Ibig sabihin, mas at risk ang mga nakatira ang mga rural emerging adults, as opposed to those who live in urban areas. So that's one example of a structural inequality, Next naman, ito, yan. So, this is I think, my most cited work, So basically, ang sinasabi lang dito is that we looked at the differences, of COVID-19 anxiety, and we found out that those who were poorer, those who were younger, females, and those who were poorer had higher levels of COVID-19 anxiety as opposed to their counterparts. And then ito naman, nakita natin in this particular paper na those who so we looked at the self-care practices and anxiety of Filipino teachers, right? So we saw that anxiety was higher among younger faculty, so age. Daily balance self-care practices were higher among males than females. And anxiety was higher among early career teachers than late career teachers or mid-career teachers. So again, these are some of the actual empirical differences that we see. Next, here another technological difference. So I look at internet access as a moderator for mental health and life satisfaction. And what we found out is those who have stable internet have a weaker correlation between mental health and life satisfaction, meaning mas mababa yung effect ng mental health sa life satisfaction ng mga magagandang internet nung panahon ng COVID, which is not surprising because internet was very important during the time of COVID-19. And then this one, looks at the relationship between national resilience, depression, and life satisfaction among emerging adults. And what we found out here is that males benefit more from national resilience, while females are more highly impacted by depression than males. So that's another example of gender inequalities. Ayan, so in this video lecture, we talked about social epidemiology. We started off with, the epidemiological transition and the history of ancient to present medicine. And then we talked about the different ways we can think about the different inequalities of health, the different fundamental causes. And we talked a little bit about social psychology of health, particularly social stress, how fundamental causes translate to proximate causes in the form of stress, and cause actual morbidity and mortality and burdens of disease.